I'm
Oh,
pretty familiar with everybody on the in the group right now. So I think we'll keep it as informal as I typically keep things. So just just jump in anytime you want. If you have a question, just cut me off. If you'd prefer, you can type it in the just in the text box, and then I think Jonathan will. If it doesn't pop right up on my screen, Jonathan will just he can cut me off and ask the question on your behalf. So I guess really not much of an introduction required. I know most of you pretty well, but my name is Rich Lehman. I'm the head coach of the Dal cross country and track teams, as well as the head coach of Halifax Athletics. With the club, I primarily work with the middle and long distance group that is sort of grade 11, 12, and up. We have a number of endurance coaches within the club, but I primarily work with, I guess, 16 years old and up. And one thing that I think, I think that we've done quite well within our club and on the Dal side of things as well has been our ability to sort of move athletes around and maybe identify event groups where they might be not necessarily more successful, but I guess, yes, more successful performance-wise. So I don't claim to have all the answers. There's definitely, whenever you're talking about any kind of training program, probably across the event groups and even across different sports, there are infinite ways of getting there. And I'm not saying this is the only way. I just thought this, John gave me an opportunity to speak to a group on something, and I thought that this was something that makes us a little bit unique in the community. That I thought could, maybe get a few more of the clubs looking at doing some similar stuff. This isn't to say this is the only way to do it. This is just the way I do it. So most of the information that I'm going to be showing you, it's all real. There's nothing that was put together just for this presentation. It's all stuff that I use and that we as a group of coaches and athletes sort of work together to come up with. And most of it is based on the four girls in this photo. So left to right, we've got Olivia Ross. Olivia was with Halifax Athletics sort of all the way through. I think she started grade 8 or 9 as a sprinter, obviously, because that's what we're talking about. Heather Beaton, she is from Pictou County, came to Dalhousie. We recruited her as a sprinter. She worked within our sprints group for a couple years and then made the transition to middle distances. Of the four of them, she's the only one to have actually stayed with the sprints as well. Like, she's moved up, but has continued to run some of the shorter events. Lizzie Como, she's the only one that isn't local. She came from the Ottawa Lions program. She was and is a 400-meter hurdler primarily. When she arrived, she was a 400-meter hurdler who ran the occasional 200 as well. And we have slowly moved her up. She was running 600s almost right away, which we'll talk about sort of the benefit of some of the indoor events as well a little bit later. But and we are now, she ran her first 800 this year in a relay, and we're hoping to get a few more in this summer. And then Anna McRae, she started with Halifax, I believe, in grade 10. She was in the sprints group there. She went to the University of Guelph, was trained as a sprinter there as well, came back, ran again for Halifax and Dal, also as a sprinter, then did some time with YHZ with Lauren Duke, sprinting there as well. And then she also made the move up. So pretty much everything we're going to be talking about is anecdotal, and what we did with these four and what I see as sort of the process of moving sprinters up. So to start, sort of a checklist of things that you as coaches, I believe, should have in place before you start moving an athlete up. And first and foremost, the most important thing, you need to have a respectful and collaborative relationship with your sprints coach. If it makes it so much easier, and for us, Mike Bavall, other than Lizzie, Mike Bavall has worked extensively with every single one of these athletes. It makes it so much easier for me as the distance coach to know exactly what they did, to get sort of any testing or performance information about what they were doing in their former program, and to really transition effectively. You're asking an athlete to put their trust in you as you change almost everything about the way they approach their sport. At the very least, you're doubling how far they're racing. That's assuming you're just going from the 4 to the 8. If you're going from the 2 to the 15, that's a huge percentage of race distance that you're adding to what the athlete is doing. So if you're able to do that in a collaborative way with their sprints coach, so that everybody's on the same page, everybody's involved, I think you're a lot more likely to get the athlete, the athlete's trust, and to have them really believe in the program. If you're coming in saying what you were doing before is stupid, we're going to do something different, you're putting the athlete in an awkward situation. So having that relationship is key. If you are the sprints coach as well as the endurance coach, which I know a lot of us are, I have the luxury of not being in that situation. But if you're both, then I assume that there's a respectful and collaborative relationship there. The next piece, and I actually forgot about this until about 15 minutes ago, when I was sort of thinking of how we did with each of these athletes, how we started making this jump. And before we even had a practice, before we after the first couple of meetings, thinking maybe we'll start trying to move up, I walked each of them individually into aerobics first, and this is, it's not even shameless. Well, I guess it is shameless. This is a plug for aerobics first. They're the best at what they do. For the most part, sprinters, or even soccer players, like athletes moving into endurance running, are in inappropriate footwear. Not necessarily for their sports or for what they do, but they're gonna start running. They're gonna start running a lot, not necessarily hundreds of miles a week, but enough that you would say that they run a lot. And if you're going to be putting that kind of volume on a pair of shoes, it has to fit. And it's kind of counterintuitive when you go into a Cleves or a Sport Check or something, and you measure your foot, and they take a Brannock device, they measure your foot, and then if your foot's a size 9 and they put you in a size 9, that's a stress fracture just begging to happen. The fit for endurance running is very different than any other sport. There needs to be probably a size, maybe a size and a half of extra space in the shoe. And athletes are going to fight this. They're going to hate it. But, when your foot hits the ground, it needs to absorb the shock of hitting the ground. And in order to do that, your toes need to spread and they need to have room to move. I'm not saying this is how your racing flats or your spikes need to fit. You want those to fit as tight as you're used to having an athletic shoe. But, for, I think, everyone except for Olivia in this group, they showed up in Nike Freeze, which are a great, general athletic shoe. But if you're going to start putting that repetitive of a movement in, you need a running specific shoe with a wide enough toe box and enough space in the shoe that you can actually do some running in it. So we have a great relationship with Aerobics First. And when I say we, I mean we as in all of us, everybody here, probably has that relationship. If you don't, I would recommend having that relationship. And I was actually talking to Matthias today, and he said that they're about 2 months away from having their online store set up, as well as an online fitting process. So for those of you not in Halifax, it will be a lot easier to get a shoe that fits properly from who I consider to be the best experts around. And I think any of you know who've worked with Luke there. And if you get a pair of shoes, doesn't work, you bring it back. It doesn't matter at what point you bring it back. They'll always accept a return. So there's my plug for Aerobics First. Most important thing you'll need is time. There's, just with these 4 girls alone, I can say that Lizzie is now ready to run an 800 effectively. This is about 3.5 years later, and Anna took about 6 weeks. And that's not because one's a better distance runner than the other. They're actually they go back and forth in the 600. They're pretty much even. I expect the same will happen in the 800 this summer. It's just adaptation. Whenever you're introducing a new stimulus, adaptation takes different amount of time for different athletes. So anybody getting really excited about moving a sprinter up to the 800 for this outdoor season, you're going to have to be a little more patient than that. It takes time, and you need to give it the time that it's going to take for each individual athlete. Just to quickly go over some key terms, when you're dealing with sprinters, and anybody who's done any amount of the of sport coach or club coach with me knows how much of a pet peeve it is of mine when people use some of these terms incorrectly. You're going to be getting sprinters who have been using these terms properly for the most part, and for some reason in the endurance community, there's this idea that we can take words that are very clearly defined words and change the meaning of them because we're slow. And I don't think that's true. So when we're talking about speed, whether we're talking about a 60-meter runner or a marathoner, if I use the term speed, I mean speed. I mean running as fast as you can. Somebody who doesn't have speed can still be doing speed work. But if we're talking about speed, we're talking about sprinting, we're talking about maximum speed. When we're talking about speed endurance, and this one gets a little bit tricky, and it was tricky for me, and I think the best thing that I was able to do was to finally, I think it was Simon Watts, our jumps coach. I literally just said, "Can you define this for me? You're smarter than me. Tell me what Mike means when he says speed endurance." And what we're talking about there is not what we would define as, call it sort of 800 pace, or those types of workouts where it feels like we're running fast and we are enduring. We're talking about ability to carry speed and to maintain it. So when you're doing speed endurance work, you're at 99 to 100% effort, and the recovery is super long, because you're going to need half an hour between 300-meter reps at 300-meter pace, and that's the kind of workout that a sprinter and a sprint coach is talking about when they use the term speed endurance. And I was running into roadblocks there because I was looking at it as maybe a little bit slower, not a little bit, quite a bit slower than all out, and closer to sort of a special endurance type of thing, which we'll talk about, because that is the most important thing in moving athletes up. But when an athlete comes to you and you're talking to their sprint coach and they say that they have great speed endurance, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be ready to nail an 800 workout right away. It means that with enough rest, they're able to almost duplicate a maximum effort, 200, 300, rarely longer than 300, but I know that Mike sometimes has them go up to 350, and then they'll usually take about 30 minutes of rest. Acceleration, this is another weird one because I think of it as really anytime you're just increasing speed. But with a sprinter, they're not really ever just accelerating in the middle of their race. It's a completely foreign concept to them to think halfway through the race you accelerate or you increase your speed. If people were running hundreds that way, I don't think they'd have much success coming up. So they're talking about literally just overcoming inertia, starting from standing and getting the top speed as fast as they can, which really doesn't apply to us at all. It can a little bit, but it's not going to be a huge deal. Tempo. This is one I talk about a lot in the sport coach course, because you have 4 different event groups in track and field, and you have 4 different ways of describing it. So what I've settled on, at least, is sort of, I call it the 70% rule. If a sprinter is talking about doing tempo work, they're usually basing everything off of their max speed. So if they're doing tempo 200s, they're doing them at 70% of their top speed. So for me, when I assign a tempo workout, which is actually quite rarely, but if I do, it's 70% of the speed they would run for that distance. So if it's a 5K tempo and you're a 15-minute 5K runner, you're running at 70% of that speed. So, whatever that math works out to, I usually leave the math up to the athletes because they're better at it than me. But it's that's the rule I go with. So whatever distance you're going 70% of the speed that you could go for that distance. And then rest. This is the one that if Olivia is here, if the other 3 were here, they'd be laughing about this one, because when I say rest, I generally mean active rest or active recovery. I want them walking. Sometimes I want them jogging. Sometimes when I'm feeling really mean, I want them going as fast as threshold pace. Sprinters tend to want to sit down, and when we're transitioning them to the type of sessions that we need to be able to hit some of those middle distance targets in workouts, as soon as they sit down, it's game over. The workout's completely done. I think if Heather were here, she could attest to that. That was a big move that she was able to make in the last sort of 18 months, was staying on her feet. There was literally an inability to fight gravity any longer than she had to. She'd cross the line, she would lie down, and she would, within 15 minutes be barfing, and the workout would be over. Now, same workout, same session, same athlete, she's able to cross the line, keep moving, and we're recovering a little bit better. So when you're assigning rest, especially if you're not going to be there at a workout, if you're dealing with sprinters or former sprinters, you need to tell them how you want them to approach that rest, because their default is going to be sitting or lying down. Yeah, go ahead.
Rich, the special endurance wasn't under one of your key terms?
No, it's got its own slide later.
Okay, we're coming to it.
Yeah, it's my favorite part. It's basically 800 pace, so it's
okay.
So why move up? That's, I guess, a big question that luckily none of these 4 really asked me, but it's it's something that I see happening a lot, and why I thought there was a need for this presentation within our community. And I think that, without sounding like a huge naysayer or anything like that, I think it's important for us as coaches, without necessarily wording it this way to the athletes, but it is important for us to understand how small our pond is, and that our job is to service athletes and to provide a means to optimize performance. That doesn't mean that we tell them, you're not fast enough to be a sprinter. This is the route you have to take if you want to go to the Olympics, right? Like that's not our place either. Our job is to, together with the athlete, come up with where they see themselves going in this sport and what their goals are. And if they are shooting for those big targets, right? If they, even something as much as going to a Legion championship and winning a medal, or anything beyond that, which there's a lot beyond winning a medal at Legions. You know, we've got to understand sort of what's out there, not just in Canada, but in the world, and what real sprinting speed looks like. When you have an athlete, and I never have, but Mike has. When you have an athlete that is a real sort of 200, 100 meter runner, and you know they're ready to run in the mid 10s or under 21 seconds for 200 meters. That kind of speed looks like something that we almost never see in this province. We see a lot of fast people. We don't see very many truly fast people. And you know, if our job is to service those athletes and to provide a means to optimize their performance, and what they tell us they want is to be a nationally competitive athlete, it's going to be very easy for us to know whether or not they have the tools to be a national or international class sprinter. It's a lot harder to tell if they have the tools to be a national or international class distance runner, because it doesn't just show itself, not necessarily on day one, but it doesn't show itself at the track immediately, the way true speed does. And you know, we need to know what that looks like, and whether or not an athlete that we're working with has it, or maybe has the capacity to have it. And that's not to say, again, that you tell them you don't have it. You either move up or you're just going to be a really good provincial sprinter. But it's important information for us to have in case it comes up that this athlete does want to take a step that you're not sure they can take in the sprints. And I can tell you again, with these 4 girls, none of them had that kind of speed. And I don't think any of them would argue with that. And you know, the other part, we're not, you know, we can do all we want. We can go to all the sport fairs that we want. We can try to make our sport seem cool. It is cool, but we're not going to win against the major team sports. We are not going to be pulling the best athletes in the province out of hockey. We're not going to get the paddlers to quit paddling and focus on track, nor do we necessarily want to, because our sport is a sport that you can really develop effectively later. But you know, we, especially in a situation like at Dal or at one of the universities, or you know, now that we've got some traction with our club championship, where we're looking at scoring points as a track and field team. Some of our best recruiting for events and event groups can be done within our own sport. You know, we at Dal this year, we swept the women's 1,000. And the silver and bronze medalists were girls who had never raced above 400 meters by the time they graduated grade 12. Like it, you know, those points were those were found points. They weren't points we were going to score. You know, St. FX had 2 girls that were much better high school 800 runners than anyone we had. So if we hadn't effectively been able to move those 2 up, we probably would have been in trouble in an event that is my favorite event to coach. So that would have been tough. But you know, so those are the reasons why I think this is important, and who should move up. I guess anyone that wants to, first of all. Same thing as I said, we're not necessarily in the business of telling people this is where you belong. You are physiologically supposed to be this type of athlete, so I'm going to make you do it. Athletes should be doing the events that they want to do. It's just when, and not if, because this will come up for all coaches, when an athlete says, I want to be the best I can at an event, that's when it becomes our job to tell them which one it is. But you know, what I'm looking for when I'm trying to identify people who are maybe sprinting that not shouldn't be, but could be successful middle distance runners, the main 3 things that I'm looking for are sprinters that recover in speed endurance sessions. And with, you know, at least with Olivia and Anna, how that sort of showed itself was literally at practice, talking to those 2 between reps in a speed endurance session. those two would just be sitting there on the wall being like, I'm so bored. I've been ready to go for 25 minutes, where, you know, some of the true sprinters are still on their back, hoping that the second rep never happens. So, you know, the athletes that are, you know, by the time that big rest in a speed endurance session is over, by the time that rest is up, they're really, not only are they ready to go, they're antsy to go, they're excited to go. And part of that is because they're very good at recovering. But part of that is because they're not fast enough to need that much recovery.
Same, yes, the same. Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, exactly. Then sprinters that attack speed endurance sessions, and this is where Heather came into the picture. Was, you know, talking to Mike about the way that she trained. She was nowhere near fit enough to do some of the things she was doing in practice. But, you know, Mike would say it's a 300, 30 minutes rest and then another one. And she would go out and run a PB in the first one, and not even, like, she wouldn't even start the second one. She would be, you know, it'd be 3 hours before you could peel her off the track. And then she'd come back 48 hours later and do it again. Like, she would never learn her lesson of how much it hurts. So for me, if I see an athlete that's willing to hurt like that every time they go to the track, that's an 800 runner. They may not have the ability to do it, but that's somebody that I'm not gonna have to fight with to try. Basically, they're gonna go out and they're gonna do the work. And then sprinters that run like distance runners, and what that looks like. This is actually a picture of Anna sprinting. This is the first corner of the 4x4 at Canada Games. She split 56.6 here, looking like this. And at the end, or I'll email it out, just because I do know everybody in this group. I'll send out a link to the study that I'm going to talk about a little bit. But, you know, there's a very real difference, and this sort of goes against a lot of the technical models that we talk about in coaching courses, but there's a big difference between the running economy of a sprinter and the running economy of a distance runner. Sprinters, everything that they're doing is based on force application. They're trying to drive as much force through the ground as possible, in as short a period of time as possible. And they're very good at it, and we're not. We being distance runners, I act as if we are, but we distance runners are significantly more efficient metabolically at just sort of being able to carry moderate amounts of speed for moderate amounts of time. And the longer up you go, the more efficient they become. And, you know, that is, like, literally the person just driving their heel through the ground, just gangly running a half marathon, is more efficient at 8-minute mile pace than Usain Bolt. That's, you know, but not at 100-meter speed. When you slow it down, and all you have to do is watch a 100-meter runner jog to see this, right? They're way up tall. Their knees are coming up super high. They're bouncing all over the place because there's so much vertical movement. And this is one of the few things that I believe you can see in real time. I'm not a coach that believes that you can watch somebody run and see all the little technical corrections you need to make. It all just happens too fast. If you're not slowing things down and taking video, and even if you are, there's not much you can do, I don't think. But if you're, you know, I don't think there's much that you can see in real time about the way someone runs. But this is one of those things. When a distance runner or somebody that is meant to be a distance runner is sprinting, their hips are quite a bit lower than you'd like to see in a sprinter. Their arms are much tighter to the torso. As I said, this picture of Anna is her trying to sprint. It's, you know, the arms usually stay in. They're not swinging as aggressively. They're not going from cheek to cheek. The hands aren't wide open. Sometimes the trunk is rotating a little bit, which you're not seeing much of with sprinters. And the movement is more straight ahead. There's a lot less coming up and down because a sprinter trying to run 10 meters per second, you do need to be coming down to the ground with quite a bit of velocity, and that kind of happens by having gravity working with you a little bit. So when all four of these girls, a little bit less Heather than the other three, but when you watch them, and they were successful 400-meter runners. I think like Anna medaled at high school provincials. Olivia won a bunch of times. Lizzie was a 64-400-meter hurdler coming out of high school, but they all still ran like distance runners, and that's the big thing that I'm looking for. They sprinted like they were running. So these are the steps of my process, and we'll go through each of these in a little bit more depth. But increase aerobic activity is number one and has to be number one. This is non-negotiable, and then the order of everything else is negotiable. Introduce special endurance, increase rep length, reconnect with speed, build a bridge between race distances, and then introduce race tactics. So aerobic activity, running is best, but it doesn't always have to be running, and we'll talk about that a little in a few seconds. But the way I start it is by lengthening their warm up, and we've got an athlete here, so I'm giving away a secret here. I don't actually believe you need nearly as long of a warm up as my athletes do. In fact, I know you don't. That length of warm up is completely unnecessary, but I like to hide volume in the warm up and the cool down. When an athlete does get to the point where they're running what I would consider an appropriate amount of volume for them, then we can talk about bringing that warm up down. But we get about an hour and a half of extra running per week just by convincing them that it's a crucial part of their warm up, and it's also a good opportunity for them to do it in front of me, which leads me to the next part. Sprinters are going to want to run way too fast. And that's why I like to introduce it through the warm-up, because it's really easy to convince them that the warm-up should be slow. But when they're going out for a run, which they would consider to be a training session, which technically it is, but it's a little bit different than what they would do as a sprinter. It's got to be slow. There's no other way to build the kind of volumes that we're looking for without it being slow enough. And the warm up and cool down are the best place to introduce those. Use the pool. If you don't have access to a pool, you can use a bike. I don't love the bike for like the only reason being that you can't go through. I mean, you can't really in the pool either, but you can't go through even close to a full running stride. And distance runners tend to lose quite a bit of mobility through their hips. Their hamstrings tighten up. We don't have that same range of motion that really any other event group in track and field has. So if we're then going onto a bike and we're sitting down and we're shortening our hip flexors on top of all of this, it's really hard to come back from. So if you're going to do extra running or extra volume on the bike instead of the pool, if you don't have access to a pool, I would recommend doing some strides afterwards just to finish up by going through that full range of motion. I like not necessarily right away, but once we're really into a groove, I like to do about an hour of aerobic activity a day, 6 days a week, plus, or not 5 days a week, and then one day where we're going 90 to some of them. Nope, none of these four yet, but some of the 800 1500 runners I work with are going up to 2 hours on one day a week, but nobody that's come up from the sprints. But if that means, for someone like Lizzie, that is sometimes all in the pool. It might be 15 minutes of running a day and 45 minutes in the pool. I think for Olivia, we are now exclusively running. So it all depends on the athlete, and you need to be able to make those adjustments together. It's not just them making that call, and it's not just you, but you need to increase aerobic activity. I'm gonna say as fast as you can, but I don't want you to think that means you have to do it fast. You want to get where you're going as fast as you can, but sometimes that means years. Sometimes that means weeks. Sometimes that means months. So take the time that you need and build as slowly as necessary. But you should have an idea of how much aerobic activity you want these athletes doing, and get there in as linear a way as you possibly can. General rule, not a generally rule. Do as much as you can. And when I say do as much as you can, I believe that for across the board for all training modalities. And that might not be that much. For some people, it's going to be quite a bit. But I like to find that line that is, this is how much work this athlete can do before we start seeing, a downturn in performance in some of the higher intensity stuff that is a little bit more important, or a lot more important. When you start seeing another part of their sort of athletic profile start declining, you've gone too far. Back it back up. But we all have to be doing as much as the athlete can to continue to progress. And the way I do it workout wise is, we start with just running. And then once they're comfortable doing that, we will move to some threshold running. And I think, I know that when Olivia started, we did 3 by 5 minutes of threshold. And I think we took 2 or 3 minutes between each rep. And now we can go 25 minutes, 60 seconds rest, and then another 20 minutes. And the pace is almost a minute per kilometer faster than it was. And we're talking 18 months, maybe. So once we're comfortable in that threshold range, we go to sort of timed reps. So I would say 3 by 3 minutes, or 5 by 2 minutes, or something like that. It really, in theory, shouldn't make a difference whether it's a 2-minute run or a 600-meter run. But these are competitive people. These are people that have been involved in track and field. And if you give them a distance to run, they're going to work way harder than if you just give them a time. So we don't touch distances until I'm 100% ready that they're ready. I'm 100% sure that they're ready. So then once we're hitting the speeds that I'd like them to be hitting for 2-3 minutes at a time, we'll start introducing some longer reps. Usually we'll start at 600, and we will move our way up to miles before we're done with this block of training. And we will monitor as much as possible for overuse injuries. And I'm just I assume you guys can see everything I'm doing on my screen right now.
Yep.
Okay. When I say we monitor as much as possible, I'm just going to show you some of the stuff that we do. And again, I've spoken with quite a few of you about some of the stuff that we do and some of the luxuries that we have, and how you can maybe apply little bits of it to your coaching environment. And it could just be as easy as a daily check-in to say, like, and this is basically all this is. It's just a sort of fancy way of doing it. So the athletes will receive at about 9 p.m. every night a text message prompting them to fill out a survey, and then I get the information. I could get it in real time, but I'm too lazy for that. I get it the next day, and it's for a body soreness map. This is Olivia's, and I do have permission to use all of this information. She would get it's literally just a picture of a person, and she will sort of click on where it hurts. And then I get it either like this or like this. And this is just January 24th to February 11th. We chose this because this was probably the heaviest training block we had all indoor season. And as you can see, there was one little period here, early February, where just about everything hurt. But because she was filling this out daily, I was seeing her every day. We were monitoring everything. She was seeing Pat Legg at least once. She was seeing him once a week, and then was seeing our athletic trainer 2, maybe 3 times a week. We were on top of all of this, so we had pain in the foot, we had pain in the calf, we had hamstring pain, we had back pain. We didn't back off at all. If I don't know about this as it's happening, something gets bad enough that we're going to have to stop what we're doing and let things happen. And as you can see, we naturally decrease training load, because I think right around here was the SMU Open. So everything was going down, and all the pain went down as well. And she actually PB'd by about 4 seconds in the 1,000 at the end of that block. So we do that. We also do, this is sleep. There's 4 of them. Well, 3 of them plus one guy who slept 15 hours and then stopped reporting. But you can see this is a good one, because the other 2 that are here are people who live in residence. So it's completely false that you can't get good sleep in residence, because Olivia is the only one in here that doesn't live in residence, and she sleeps the least. But it's consistent, which is mostly what I'm looking for. And then we've got athletic anxiety, we've got non-athletic anxiety, which, as far as I'm concerned, is just academic load. There, occasionally there will be some sort of personal stuff in there, and I don't pry. If I see a spike, and actually this is good, right? So everything is, just for my purposes, because I'm a visual person, good is high and bad is low. But so if I see this one, a big spike in athletic anxiety, I know, she's about to race. I'm expecting that. But I might say, hey, what's going on here? Your non-athletic anxiety just spiked, and usually it's midterm season and they haven't told me, or sometimes they have told me. But just little things like this can help me decide, literally on a day-to-day basis, like, hey, like, Olivia, it's maybe back off for 48 hours, just on volume, so that we can make sure we hit the workouts that we want to hit and get the quality that we want until you're feeling a little bit better. And it's, as I said, it's in real time. So it's, even if you're getting weekly information, it's really hard to, sometimes the ship has sailed at that point. It's not here. And the other one that we do is just general happiness, motivation to train, and non-athletic motivation. And there's Olivia. Olivia is, this year was really good, and I think most of it was because, for the most part, we had straight lines in a lot of this stuff. She was on top of things academically, she was on top of things athletically, and when you start seeing these graphs undulating a lot, like all over the place, that's when you start seeing sort of dips in performance. And then the last one would be hydration. This is one nobody asked yet, but I do count coffee in fluid intake. A lot of coaches don't. I do. I think they all should be drinking coffee, and B, I can't imagine not. So it's and I guess I shouldn't say they should be, but if they're gonna wake up and have a cup of coffee, count it, as far as I'm concerned. So that's really, that's not, I guess that's not all we're monitoring, but that's all that I insist that they do on a daily basis. And the reason I think it's more important for the athletes that are moving up than the athletes who are just sort of staying in the event group that they're used to is because the overuse injuries for sprinters are, they're not uncommon, but most injuries for sprinters are sort of one-off. You know, a hamstring goes, a quad goes, something like that, where for us it starts as a little nagging pain, and it just sort of, it gets worse, and then suddenly gets better, and then suddenly it gets worse again, and one day you wake up with a stress fracture. And sprinters or former sprinters, I think because those first couple of weeks, it doesn't actually hurt that much. They're a lot less likely to report that pain than somebody who's familiar with the event group is, because as far as they're concerned, if they're not limping and if they're not like, you know, on the ground in agony, it's not an injury. But it's going to be if you don't report. So that body mapping has been great for us with the athletes moving up, because I want them to tell me, even if if something feels off, if something feels tight, let me know, and we can address it immediately. And for the most part, we can increase volume the way we want to if I'm on top of those things. Special endurance. So this is where, you know, the big difference between speed endurance and special endurance, and just pure endurance. What I mean by this is sort of their goal race pace. And for really what we're talking about here is 800 pace. Maybe we'll go up to 1,000 pace. None of these girls are 1,500 meter specialists yet. Olivia will run some this summer, but the rest of them probably will never run a 1,500. So we're talking about 800 pace, and that pace is going to, yeah.
I thought I wasn't.
Well, you ran one last year and you thought you weren't going to either. So.
Yeah, but I thought this was going to be 4.8.
Yeah, you're going to do them all.
Okay. That's fine. Okay, continue.
Yeah, that 800 pace stuff, especially at first for them, that's going to feel really weird, because, you know, if you're starting at sort of 220 pace, that's 35-second 200s, that it's going to feel slow, and then suddenly it's going to feel impossible. So really being able to lock in on that pace and then building endurance at that pace is what I mean when I'm talking about special endurance. So we start, you know, once we've got that sort of, we know how to run thing down, we'll start with shorter reps in the 100 to 300 meter range with short rest, probably not longer than 2 to 3 minutes if we're going to 300, and no longer than 45 seconds if we're running hundreds. We won't progress to what I would consider real workouts until these are easy. I want them saying, like, I want them in that minute of recovery. I want them recovering to the point that they're struggling to run slow enough that it, you know, to call it 800 pace. And that, you know, for some of them, you know, Olivia and Anna are good examples. That happened almost immediately. They got the hang of it pretty quickly. They're just like, okay, you know, these short reps are easy. For others, it might take a little bit longer. And I don't recommend moving on until they're calling it easy, which will happen eventually. Increase rep ranges with a slight increase in rest. I say slight because I don't want to start moving into that sort of sprinter training for a 400 range. I don't want to start saying we're taking 20 minutes rest between reps. So, you know, we will do sort of broken 800s, and those will be, we usually take 3 minutes rest in total within that rep or within that set. So if we're doing a 600, 200, we take 3 minutes. If we're doing 400, 200, 200, we go 2 minutes, 1 minute. If it's 4 twos, we go a minute between each of them. When you start increasing those rep ranges, the volume has to go down. The example I have here is extreme, but it is, these are two workouts that we have done. I don't think we did the first one this year, but we did it last year. We'll do 2 sets of 10 200s, which is 4,000 meters of work. And they'll breeze through that. And then we'll do 2 by 500, 300, which is only a mile of work. And that'll be one of the hardest workouts they've done all year. We may even go to 3 sets of that, but a lot of times we'll make that third set a 4-2-2 or 3-3-2 or something like that. But if there are any reps above 400 meters and we're at 8 pace, we won't do more than a mile and a half. But we have been known to go up to 4K of work at that pace if the reps are short enough.
Wow.
I guess I probably should have said this at the beginning, and I'll say it now as well. These are, 18 to 25-year-old athletes. This is, the general ideas and the process, I think, can be applied to anyone, call it grade 10 and up. But bring those volumes down. And even some of the reporting stuff, it's going to be a lot harder to get a 15-year-old to fill out a survey every night. And I wouldn't recommend even trying that, but, so apply this, use common sense when it comes to younger athletes. And then after we're comfortable with the paces that we're looking for, we'll reconnect with speed. That sometimes only takes a couple weeks. We'll start sprinting usually sometime. It might even be before we're 100% confident with those longer reps, but it will always be after we've run some 2s and 3s at the pace we're looking for. When you first start sort of bringing some true speed work back into a program, they will have gotten slower. I promise you they'll have gotten slower, and you have to stay calm, because they won't. They're going to lose their mind. And, of those 4 girls, 3 of them are as fast now as they ever were. And 1 will be. But it's exactly the same as everything else. It's going to take more time for some people. But we have to bring it back into the program, and this is again where having that relationship with your sprint coach is important, because I have all the data for all of these girls of exactly how fast they were when they were sprinting full time. We've got timing gates. You don't need timing gates. You can hand time everything, but these things need to be measurable. You need to be sure that things are working. So the way we usually do it, we do occasionally have pure speed sessions, but I'd say 75% of the time we're just doing it between the warm-up and the main part of our session. There is some value to sprinting at the end of a workout, but that's not speed. That's practicing accessing speed while you're tired, or accessing how fast you can run at the end of a workout, which will definitely help at the end of a race, but you're not doing speed work if you're doing it when you're tired. So we will warm up. That's when we'll do, we call them flies. They're 25-meter flies. I believe they're 25-meter flies because the longest straight stretch on the Dalplex track is 25 meters. I think everyone else in the world does 30s, but we do 25s, and that's the number that we're comfortable with. So 100 meters total is usually what we'll do. We will occasionally maybe go up to 125 and do 5 flies, but most of the time I'll tell them they're doing 5 and I'll stop it at 3 or 4. I'll usually stop it once they get noticeably slower. and will max out at twice per week. So it's still way less speed work than they did as sprinters. But we're not looking for them to get faster. We're looking for them to get as close to as fast as they were before as possible. It should normalize relatively quickly. You should, in a sort of 6 to 8 week period, get them back to where they were, or within a tenth of a second over 25 meters, which isn't that close to where they were, but they will have slowed down to a lot more than a tenth of a second slower. But it, getting an athlete getting back to where they were before in any measurable way is actually pretty easy and doesn't take much. And as I said, we're not looking to get better. We're just looking to get close to where we were. And then once we're where we want to be, we will hit top speed once per week just to maintain it. But we stop really attacking it as soon as I'm comfortable that we're fast enough. Their acceleration from standing start will have gotten worse. It'll probably never get better again, and I don't care about that. Just as an example. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's fine.
Okay. This is Anna McRae's progression for 25-meter flies. There is no November 182, so I'm not sure what that means. But the dates are all wrong. I tried to get it here on the PowerPoint, but this is just I guess it was a 7-week period in the first year that she moved up. And from conversations with Mike, she was on average right around 3 seconds for 25 meters. She'd be sort of anywhere from the mid 290s to 305 usually when she would go out and do flies. And when we came back indoors after we had done that block of just learning how to run, she ran 328, and she was pretty cool with it. But you can imagine how an athlete would just be like, man, I am a quarter of a second slower over 25 meters. Like, what we're doing is not working. I just became a worse athlete. So that's why I say you have to remain calm and you have to trust the process, because in that time, she went from 328 back up to 295 between November 18th and the 3rd of January. She had a little drop around Christmas. That sort of, she got better, she got worse, then she got better, and then we stopped timing them. We got her back where we wanted her. We started racing that next weekend, and that's the testing result. That's the testing score that I care about once we're in racing season, is their race times. I will occasionally have them do a fly here and there just to see how they're recovering from other sessions that we've done, or from weekends where they may have raced 2 or 3 times. It's just a nice little check-in, but I'm not overthinking it once we know that they're as fast or close to as fast as they were before. But don't expect them to get faster than they were before unless you're hitting this sort of maybe even 3-4 times a week. And I wouldn't, that's how much time are you willing to invest in increasing top speed when you're running an event where you never actually run top speed. And then building the bridge and race tactics, some of the things that is going to be not confusing for them, but it might be limiting factors for them if they are, physically ready to run a good 800 or a good 600, and it might not happen. What are some of those reasons? Sharing a lane is the big one that sprinters struggle with for a few reasons. Contact is one. Sprinters tend to be a little bigger and stronger than their distance counterparts, so sometimes they love that contact, and they just you're seriously going to bump into me. You're 100 pounds, but it can be a little alarming to them the first couple times it happens. But more important is that when you're sharing a lane and you're running in a pack, you're not necessarily in control of the effort that you're expending. When you're running a 400 and you're in your own lane, you're controlling your race, you're running your race, and you're comparing it to the race that's being run by someone else in a different lane. If you're in lane 1 and somebody's right in front of you and another person's right beside you and another person's right behind you, you have to be able to just sort of react and embrace the fact that you don't get to make any of these decisions. You're just running, and you're reacting to the race. Noticing and covering moves is a big one. They may be super ready to run fast and win races, but if there's a group of people and somebody makes a move, somebody who's not used to running that type of race may not even notice that move has happened until it's too late. They may swing into lane 2 to make their move, and there's 2 people way out in front of them they didn't even know were there. Kind of thing that there's really no way of for sure preparing for those, but doing the athletes a disservice if you don't explain to them that these things happen and try your best to put them in situations where they can practice it before they have to go out and do it in a race. And sometimes going out and doing it in a race is the way to do it, but before they have to go out and do it in an important race. Some ways you can simulate that would be time trials. We always do something in November or December with people moving up for the first time. Sometimes we use that the warm-up meet for that, but we've done 800 time trials, we've done 600 time trials. The 4x4 is a great opportunity for that if you have the bodies. The person that you're trying to teach those lessons to, put them on the second leg or the anchor leg. The second leg, because that's the cut-in leg, and that's a really good skill to practice. And a 4x4 is a super fun way of practicing that, and it's an event that they should be comfortable with. And the anchor leg is where most of the actual racing happens. So that's a great way to practice, closing gaps, not panicking when gaps get closed on you. The heats at the Canada Games this year with Noah anchoring our team, that was a great example of somebody who it looked to me innately knew what they were doing when the whole group closed on him and he managed to run away in the last 100 meters without panicking. That kind of thing, that's a great way to learn that, because I promise you that's going to happen in an 800 one day. And the fact that it's been practiced in a 4x4 in a more comfortable environment is a good thing. And then the indoor distances, I know that from Jonathan's perspective as the meet director, they're super annoying. But having that literal bridge between 400 and 800 meters has done wonders, I've found, with these athletes, moving them from the 4 to the 8, because the 6 is kind of just like a long 4, but then it's easy for them to wrap their head around, okay, I can just tack on an extra 30 seconds. And it's way harder than it sounds, but you're no longer doubling the race distance when you're moving up from 6. So I actually like that. And the K is more of a short 15 than a long 8, in that you have to run it fairly evenly. So when an athlete is a good 6 runner and a good 8 runner, and then moves up to the 1,000 and really nails it, which is what Olivia did this year, whether it's right away or next year or whenever, that is, alarm bells go off to me. This is somebody who's going to be able to run 1,500 meters, and it doesn't have to happen tomorrow. But the 1,000 is a very good indicator that a 15 is possible for that athlete, and a 6 is a good indicator that an 800 is possible for a 400 meter runner, because some 400 meter runners can't make it to 6, and it's actually really funny when you see them try. And then just final sort of key points to always keep in mind. Sprinting was their introduction to the sport. So all of the things that we as distance coaches like to think about and think is sort of, this is the way our sport works, may not necessarily be the way the sport works for them. So running can cause stress. And this was a tough one for me, because we'd come into exam period, and for me, it was always, I didn't want to do the strength stuff. I didn't want to meet as a team. I wanted to be able to focus on what I was doing, but I always wanted to go up for a run because, you know, it would clear my head. It would do all kinds of great things for me. The long, slow running is the part of this event group that most of these athletes don't like. So you have to keep that in mind in stressful times in their lives, or, you know, when you're talking to the athlete about what their programming is like. Most 1,500, 5,000 meter runners, the favorite day of the week for them is Sunday when they get to go for their long run. And most former sprinters moving up, every Sunday morning is the worst 20 minutes of their life before they actually get out the door and start their run. So do try to remember that. Keep it social. There's no sports practice more social than a sprints practice, because so much of it is rest. And, you know, when I joke about it a lot with them, but I like seeing the sprinters just sort of hanging out between reps, and, you know, they're friends, and everything's fun for them. And that is a little bit harder when you got 60 seconds rest, and in that 60 seconds, you have to somehow, like somehow bring your heart rate down from 190 to 150, refocus your eyes, and get back on the line and do that terrible thing again. So, you know, find ways. You know, it's not necessarily our job to keep it fun, but I think it kind of is. You know, whether that's in the warm up or the cool down, or, you know, find ways to have people laughing at practice, because sprinters really like that for the most part. Limit competition in practice. You're not going to be able to do that completely, but most sprinters train in an environment where they're working alone. Whether there's a lot of people there or not, they're very rarely doing reps together, especially on a track like the Dalplex, because it's pretty dangerous to have 4 people running as fast as 100 meters at the same time there. So they're used to, you know, getting the line, do the thing, walk back. The next person does the thing, walks back. Distance runners in workouts, you're putting them on the track together, and if they think they have to race each other every single rep of every single practice, no, it's not going to work out for anybody. So making sure that can, you know, that's communicated well is important. And yeah, don't assume they can kick, because they can't at first. Really, when it comes down to it, and this is something that, you know, it seems counterintuitive, because you think the fastest person in the race should have the best kick. The fastest person in the race only has the best kick if they feel good enough to use it. Generally speaking, the fittest person in the race has the best kick. The person who can get the closest to their max speed in the last, call it 200 meters of the race, is the one who's going to have the fastest speed at that point, because almost nobody is actually hitting their top speed, and people moving up usually don't have the years of kilometers under their belt, and they're not going to be able to access all that speed they have, because they've used all of their energy to get to the last 200 meters. So if you're race modeling, or if you're race planning for an athlete that was a former sprinter and it's their first or second 800 ever, you really can't plan on having them just like turn that last corner and suddenly being a sprinter again. It's, you know, speed is important, but usually the person who's moving the fastest at the end is the person who was the most efficient through the rest of the race.